Sometimes a story ends, not with a bang, but with a quiet, collective sigh of acceptance. A hero falls, the credits roll, and the audience is left to file out of the theater, carrying the weight of what could have been. In the world of professional wrestling, these endings are brutal and unforgiving. There are no reshoots, no second takes. A career can be extinguished in a single, gut-wrenching moment. The fans had accepted such an ending. They had mourned, they had moved on, and they had resigned themselves to the fact that their champion was gone forever. They were silent until that entrance music hit. What followed was pure WWE history, a comeback that no one expected. The air in the arena was thick with a strange sort of reverence, a heavy blanket of quiet that felt out of place amidst the usual chaos of Friday night SmackDown. In the center of the ring, bathed in a solitary, arrogant spotlight, stood Malik, the Vulture, Creed. The World Heavyweight Championship was slung over his shoulder, but it didn't seem to fit. It looked like a stolen artifact, a relic he didn't earn but simply picked from the rubble. He paced the canvas, a microphone in his hand, a smirk plastered on his face that played to a chorus of muted boos. The energy wasn't there. The fire was gone. For weeks, Creed had paraded this championship, reminding everyone of the night he'd won it, the night he hadn't just defeated his opponent, but had effectively erased him. He spoke of a new era, his era, but his words echoed in a space haunted by the ghost of the man he'd replaced. The fans weren't angry anymore. They were just sad. They held up their signs, not for Creed, but for the fallen king. Kalen, the Vanguard, Thorn. The signs were faded, some tear-stained, held up more as memorials than as messages of hope. Creed reveled in this melancholy. He fed on it. He was the villain who had not only won the war but had also convinced the world that the hero was never coming back. He raised the microphone, the silence of 20,000 people his personal symphony. To understand the silence, you have to go back 6 months. It was a main event for the ages, a battle that had the entire industry buzzing. Kalen Thorn, the workhorse champion, the man who built his legacy on resilience, was defending his title against the viciously ambitious Malik Creed. The match was a masterpiece of storytelling and physicality, a brutal ballet that pushed both men to their absolute limits. But then came the final sequence, a top rope maneuver gone horribly wrong. It wasn't the impact that the crowd remembered, it was the sound, a sickening, unnatural thud that silenced the roaring arena in a nanosecond. Kalen didn't move. His eyes, usually burning with intensity, were vacant. The pinfall was a mere formality. The world held its breath as medics rushed the ring. The image that was seared into the collective memory of the fan base was Kalen, their vanguard, being carefully loaded onto a stretcher, giving a weak, heartbreaking thumbs up to a silent crowd. The official announcement came a week later. A severe neck injury, specifically to the C1 and C2 vertebrae. The doctors were unequivocal. It was a miracle he could walk. Returning to the ring wasn't just ill-advised, it was impossible. His career was over. The fans grieved, the chapter closed, and Malik Creed's reign began, not with a bang, but with the chilling echo of that final, devastating impact. The hero's story had ended, tragically and abruptly, and everyone had finally, painfully, accepted it. Back in the present, Malik Creed soaked it all in. Kalen Thorn is a memory. He sneered into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. He is a footnote in my story. This is my championship. This is my ring. This is my era. And there is nobody in that locker room or anywhere on this planet who can do a single thing about it. He held the championship high above his head, the gold catching the arena lights. He was waiting for a challenger, any challenger, to legitimize his claim. But no music hit. No superstar emerged from the back. The silence stretched on, validating his every word. It was the confirmation he craved, the final nail in the Vanguard's coffin. He laughed, a hollow, grating sound. And then it happened. A single, distorted, electronic screech cut through the arena. The lights went out. Total, absolute blackness. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath born of confusion, not excitement. Was it a technical glitch? A new superstar's debut? For 5 long seconds, the only sound was the frantic hum of electricity and the beating of thousands of hearts. Then, from the darkness, came a sound no one ever expected to hear in a WWE arena again. The first few haunting, unmistakable chords of Kalen Thorne's entrance theme, echoes of a king. The silence didn't just break, it detonated. Disbelief morphed into a desperate, primal roar that shook the building to its very foundation. It wasn't a pop. It was a sonic boom of pure, unadulterated hope. As the familiar anthem swelled, the stage erupted in a blaze of his signature crimson pyrotechnics. And there, silhouetted against the fire and smoke, stood a figure. It was him, Kalen Thorne. He wasn't wearing his grand entrance gear, no majestic robes or crown. He was in street clothes, jeans and a simple black t-shirt. He looked leaner, harder, but it was his eyes that told the story. The camera zoomed in, and the world saw a gaze that was a universe of conflict. There was the fire they remembered, the burning intensity of a champion. But underneath it, there was something else, a flicker of pain, a shadow of doubt, a profound weariness. This wasn't the return of a superhero. This was the return of a man who had been to hell and had somehow, impossibly, clawed his way back to the gates. He didn't move. He just stood there, letting the roar of the crowd wash over him, a tidal wave of emotion he seemed to be absorbing for strength. In the ring, Malik Creed's arrogant smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of ghostly white shock. His jaw was slack, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk out of its own grave. The fans were no longer just watching a wrestling show. They were witnessing a resurrection, live and in real time, and the very air crackled with the impossible reality of the moment. While the arena was experiencing a moment of pure magic, the scene backstage was one of utter chaos. In the gorilla position, the small, cramped area just behind the entrance curtain, producers and road agents were screaming into their headsets. Who cleared this? Did anyone clear this? The lead director was frantically cutting between camera shots, trying to capture every angle of the pandemonium in the crowd and the shock on Creed's face. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't on any creative brief. In a business where every second is meticulously planned, this was a beautiful, terrifying anomaly. In a quiet, secluded office deep within the arena, the company's highest-ranking executive, a stern man named Mr. Sterling, watched the monitor with a grim expression. He had personally overseen Kalen Thorne's retirement. He'd read the medical reports, listened to the neurologists, and made the final, difficult call. He had forbidden any discussion of a potential return, deeming it a catastrophic liability. The fact that Kalen was out there, on live television, was a direct defiance of his authority and, more importantly, a reckless gamble with a man's life. "Shut it down," another executive suggested, his voice trembling slightly. But Sterling simply held up a hand. "No," he said, his voice low and cold. "The world is watching. We let it play out." He wasn't watching as a promoter anymore. He was watching as a man who knew the immense, unseen cost of the miracle everyone else was celebrating. The spectacle was magnificent, but the fallout, he knew, would be severe. Hundreds of miles away, in a quiet suburban home, Kalen Thorne's wife, Elena, watched the same scene unfold on her living room television. Her hands were pressed against her mouth, her knuckles white. Her phone was buzzing incessantly on the coffee table with texts from friends and family, but she couldn't look away from the screen. She wasn't seeing a returning hero. She was seeing the man who had spent the last 3 months struggling to lift their daughter without a shooting pain in his neck. She was seeing the man who woke up from nightmares of the injury, drenched in a cold sweat. She was seeing the man who had sat across from her at their kitchen table, tears in his eyes, and promised her he was done. He had promised her that his health, their future, their family, was more important than the roar of the crowd. Every cheer that erupted from the television speakers felt like a betrayal. She knew his demons. She knew that the ghost of his career, ending on someone else's terms, had haunted him every single day. She understood the fire that drove him, the need to write his own ending. But as she watched him walk down that ramp, each step deliberate and measured, her heart ached with a terrifying mixture of pride and fear. He was chasing his glory, but in doing so he was breaking the most important promise he had ever made. The world saw a legend reborn. She saw a husband gambling with the only life they had. The moment Kalen Thorne and Malik Creed stood face to face in the ring, the segment ending on a silent, intense stare down, the internet had a complete and total meltdown. The clip went viral faster than anything in the company's recent history. It transcended the wrestling bubble. Major sports networks cut into their regular programming to show the footage, their analysts struggling to explain the significance of what had just happened to an audience unfamiliar with the backstory. The narrative war began almost immediately. On one side, it was framed as the greatest comeback story in modern sports, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Hashtags like Wachichiu He Is Risen and Vanguard Returns trended globally. Fans shared stories of crying in their living rooms, of feeling a sense of hope they hadn't felt in years. But a darker, more critical narrative quickly emerged. Medical professionals and concerned journalists began asking the hard questions. How was he medically cleared? Was the company promoting an insanely dangerous and irresponsible act? Articles were published with headlines like WWE's Reckless Gamble and The Feel-Good Moment That Endangers Lives. The company's stock fluctuated wildly in after-hours trading. What was a moment of pure, unscripted emotion for the fans had become a complex, high-stakes public relations crisis. Kalen Thorne wasn't just a wrestler anymore. He had become a symbol, a lightning rod for a debate about passion versus safety, and the pressure on him, the company, and his family intensified with every passing hour. The shockwave hit the locker room just as hard. When Kalen walked back through the curtain, the backstage area, which had been in a state of frantic chaos, fell silent. The other wrestlers parted for him like the sea. The reaction was a complex tapestry of emotions. For the veterans who had known him for years, there were tears and heartfelt embraces. They understood the drive, the need to go out on one's own shield. They saw him not as a competitor, but as a brother who had returned from exile. For the younger generation, the ones who grew up idolizing him, it was like seeing a monument come to life. A young, rising star approached him, his eyes wide with awe. "Kalen," he stammered, I just wanted to say, seeing you out there, it reminded me why I started doing this." But there were others. In the corners, there were whispers. Wrestlers who had been scratching and clawing for a top spot, who saw Kalen's return not as an inspiration, but as an obstacle. He had just taken the most coveted spot on the card, the main event of the upcoming pay-per-view. To them, it felt like a ghost had returned to reclaim a throne they were next in line for. The respect was there, but it was tinged with a bitter, unspoken resentment. Kalen felt it all, the love, the awe, the jealousy. He was home, but he was also an outsider, a relic from another time, and the weight of his own legacy was now a burden he had to carry into the fight of his life, the night of the pay-per-view. The massive stadium was still hours from opening its doors, a hollow, empty shell filled with an eerie silence. In the center of the ring, under the dim work lights, stood Kalen Thorne. He was alone, just soaking in the quiet, when a figure emerged from the tunnel. It was Malik Creed. No cameras, no crowd, no bravado. Creed slowly walked to the ring and slid under the ropes. He didn't look like a vulture. He looked like a scared kid. "They never told me you were coming back," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I swear, Kalen, that night, the injury, I never wanted that to happen." Kalen just nodded, his gaze fixed on the endless rows of empty seats. "I know," Kalen replied, his voice raspy. "I watched the tape 1,000 times. It was a freak accident. It wasn't your fault." Creed looked stunned. He had built his entire reign on being the man who broke the Vanguard. He had used it as his shield, his claim to infamy. "Then why?" Creed asked, his confusion genuine. "Why come back? To get revenge on me?" Kalen finally turned to face him, and for the first time, Creed saw the full depth of his exhaustion. "It was never about you, Malik," Kalen said softly. "It was about me. My story didn't get an ending. It just stopped, on a stretcher, with doctors telling me what I could and couldn't do. I couldn't let that be the last word. Tonight isn't about winning this," he said, gesturing to the championship. "It's about finishing the sentence." The match was everything the world wanted it to be. A brutal, emotional, and unforgettable war. Kalen Thorne, running on pure adrenaline and heart, defied the odds and defeated Malik Creed, winning the World Heavyweight Championship one last time. The crowd erupted in a moment of pure, cathartic joy. He held the title high, tears streaming down his face, the perfect storybook ending to the greatest comeback of all time. But the real story, the final chapter, didn't happen in the ring. It happened 2 weeks later in the sterile, quiet office of a spinal surgeon. The camera, in our story, would push in on an X-ray film clipped to a light box. The doctor's voice is calm, gentle, but firm. "The C1 is showing significant stress fractures, Kalen," he explains. "The comeback, the match, it did more damage than we feared. You didn't just risk paralysis, you guaranteed that any future physical strain, even minor, could be catastrophic. There are no more comebacks, there are no more matches, this is it. For good." Kalen simply stares at the X-ray, at the ghostly white image of his own shattered mortality. He isn't sad. He isn't angry. A slow, faint smile crosses his lips. The shocking twist wasn't the comeback itself. The twist was its purpose. He knew the risks were astronomical. He knew it would likely be the last time he ever competed. The return was never about starting a new chapter. It was about writing the final, definitive period on his own terms. He didn't come back to reclaim his career. He came back to sacrifice the rest of it for one last, perfect moment. To go out not on a stretcher, but on his own 2 feet, as champion, with the world chanting his name. The fans thought it was over, and then they thought it was a new beginning. The truth was far more profound. It was over. He just made sure the ending was his.